I appreciate in the book, you'll see that the book is actually has an enormous amount of data, but you don't even know it as you're reading it. It's all, and the anecdotes are very telling, and one of them has to do with this issue about Medicare, where Paul says that inevitably the case comes up when you talk about Canadian healthcare versus U.S. healthcare about the waiting list for hip replacement. And Paul says, but you don't realize that the majority of hip replacements are done for the elderly, which means it's done under Medicare. And so you're comparing a government-run program with a government-run program. And it happens that our government-run program is more lavishly funded than their government-run program. Yeah. You don't, it's that type of factoid, if you will, that is so telling.
Right, that's one that I really mystified, that the hip replacement story comes up over and over again, and I had never seen until I just went to look at it. It seemed obvious that it turns out that actually 2/3 of hip replacements in the U.S. are paid for by Medicare. So that this notion that the Canadian waiting list for hip replacements proves what's wrong with socialized medicine that's so central. That particular one is so central. Well, now it's been replaced by Rudy Giuliani's prostate. But anyway.
Best medical care that's right in the world, according to Giuliani. I thought that in the book, the one thing that stands out is that politics matter, rules matter, and that the economy can in fact be prosperous while we do things that we would consider radical. But the other aspect of the book is your discussion about institutions and norms, and how changes in institutions and changes in norms account for, as you say, the bulk of what happens. And one of the norms that you talk about is the norm that still exists in Europe, which is shame about being a billionaire when other people are earning $20,000, or shame about having your CEO earn 300 times more than your average worker. And you talk about the death of outrage. And maybe you want to talk about that.
So this is, okay, CEO compensation is one of those really clear-cut cases where you can really see what changed. Okay, so look, there is not a market for CEOs. There's not a hiring wall and the van drives by. CEOs are paid based on the recommendations of a compensation committee, which is appointed by the CEO. So there's always been this issue that basically the CEO is setting his own pay. But in the 50s, 60s, much of the 70s, that led to paychecks that were 30 to 40 times what the average worker was being paid, which seemed like a lot at the time. But why didn't we go higher? Because now it's about 350 for Fortune 500 CEOs, but they earn on average about 350 times what the average worker is paid. In the academic literature, they talk about the outrage constraint. That basically the outrage constraint. That there were enough players to say, hey, this is ridiculous. If this is unacceptable. You can't be laying off workers or cutting wages while paying yourself 20 million or 30 million or 100 million. And what happened was that and by the way, the people who were advocating higher executive pay, there were a lot of people. People seeing the movie Wall Street, the famous speech by Gordon Gekko about greed is good is partly lifted from Ivan Boesky, but the arguments he makes are taken straight from the academic literature. They're actually almost verbatim from articles from the Harvard Business Review from the time. And they also said, well, the reason we're not paying CEOs enough is because there are all these unions and politicians who look over their shoulder and say, no, you can't pay yourself that much. Well, that went away because of the change in the political climate. Unions are gone, largely. Politicians no longer hold hearings to denounce excessive executive pay. Newspapers don't write scandal stories unless it's really egregious. And so you get into the world where if times are good, then the CEO gets a huge cut of the profits, and things go badly, then the CEO is let go with and punished by being given a $159 million severance package, which just happened in Merrill Lynch, of course. So this is, and it's the change in the norms. It was considered, not only were there people saying, no, you can't do this, but it was considered to be demoralizing, that workers would not really do their jobs properly if they felt that they were being exploited to pay some outlandish paycheck to CEOs, but that expectation went away. And in that way, and this pervades the economy. It's just, you look at just how different people's expectations are about whether there should be some reasonable equality in the workplace. There used to be a lot of that, there's very little now, and that, more than the iron law of supply and demand, explains what happened to our society.
And you talked in the book about how in the 1950s and 60s and even 70s, there were rich people, but the rich people, I think you used the metaphor of they drove the Cadillac and other people drove the Chevrolet, that there were things that they could do that other people didn't do, but they lived in the same kind of activities. And you're talking today about how the rich literally live in their own world. I mean, the rich don't need us during a given day or during a given week, and that's probably never happened since the days maybe of the king in the castle.
Well, it's the analogy I would have is with Latin America. Actually, if you look at the income distribution numbers, they're advanced rich countries are generally relatively equal, and third world countries much more unequal. And the United States is actually sort of halfway in between. We look somewhere in between Scandinavia and Brazil, and we're looking a little more like Brazil all the time. And that comes down to the way people live. So famously, well, if you do, in my prior life, I worried about crises in other people's republics, actually, I used to do lots and lots of this. I invented currency crises, not the thing, but the academic literature 20 years ago, and I spent a lot of time flying around to Southeast Asia and Latin America, and I don't do that now because I'm trying to save my own damn republic, but the classic thing if you're in Brazil is that the streets of Sao Paulo are basically impassable because the traffic's out of control and the infrastructure is terrible, but the rich don't mind because they get around the city by helicopter. Well, just opened at Newark Airport is the helicopter service to Lower Manhattan. So if you can't handle the Jersey Turnpike, and that in itself is going to undermine the sense on the part of the elite that you have to do something about making the infrastructure work. So you can see it. It's a very broad sense. There's just a divorce. People live different. The economic elite is no longer part of the material life that the rest of society is in, and I think that's a cost over and above. It's not just that all or nearly all of the economic growth over the past several decades has been siphoned off to a relatively small part of the population. There's a further cost, which is the disintegration of the commonality of society. We're no longer a community in the way we were.